Behind the golden gates of Windsor Castle, where centuries of royal tradition echo through marble hallways, a young princess was about to uncover a truth that would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. Princess Charlotte, at just 9 years old, possessed something far more dangerous than royal blood. She had her grandmother's keen eye for spotting lies, and her great-grandmother's fierce determination to protect what she loved. What started as an innocent game of hide-and-seek in the castle's forgotten corridors would lead Charlotte to a discovery that even the most experienced royal guards had missed. A secret so carefully buried that it had fooled everyone from palace staff to government officials. Everyone except the little girl who refused to ignore what her heart was telling her. The truth about Queen Camilla wasn't what anyone expected. And when Charlotte finally found the courage to speak up, her words would either save the royal family from a devastating scandal or tear it apart forever. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful truths, and sometimes those truths can only be revealed by someone pure enough to see past the lies that adults choose to believe. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors, where Princess Charlotte's small feet made soft pattering sounds as she ran. Her golden hair bounced with each step, and her bright blue eyes sparkled with the kind of mischief that made her nannies both smile and worry at the same time. Today was different from her usual supervised playtime in the nursery. Today, her parents, Prince William and Catherine, were attending an important meeting with palace officials. Her brothers were at their lessons, and Charlotte had convinced her governess that she needed just 5 minutes to retrieve her favorite doll from her bedroom. Those 5 minutes had already stretched into 20 as Charlotte found herself wandering through parts of the castle she had never seen before. The corridors here were different from the family quarters she knew so well. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking ancestors, whose eyes seemed to follow her as she walked. The carpet beneath her feet was deep red with golden thread that caught the light from crystal chandeliers hanging high above her head. Everything felt older here, more serious, like the castle was holding its breath and waiting for something important to happen. Charlotte had always been curious about the parts of the castle that were off-limits to children. Her grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth, had once told her that every room in the castle held stories, and that the most interesting stories were often found in the places where people forgot to look. Charlotte remembered those words now, as she turned down another unfamiliar hallway, her small hand trailing along the smooth wooden panels that lined the walls. The sound of voices caught her attention. They were coming from somewhere ahead, drifting through what seemed like a partially open door. Charlotte recognized one of the voices immediately. It belonged to her step-grandmother, Queen Camilla. But there was something different about the way Camilla was speaking. Her voice sounded sharp and impatient, nothing like the gentle tone she used when Charlotte and her brothers were around. Curiosity overcoming caution, Charlotte crept closer to the source of the voices. She found herself standing beside a heavy wooden door that was indeed slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see into what appeared to be a private study. The room was smaller than the grand chamber she was used to, but it felt important somehow. The walls were covered with books bound in leather, and there was a large desk near the window where papers were scattered about. Queen Camilla stood with her back to the door, facing a man Charlotte had never seen before. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark suit that made him look like he belonged more in a business office than in the royal castle. His hair was gray and slicked back, and when he spoke, his voice had an accent that Charlotte couldn't quite place. She pressed herself closer to the wall, making sure to stay hidden while straining to hear what they were saying. "The arrangements are almost complete," the stranger was saying, his fingers drumming nervously on a briefcase he held in his lap. "But there are still concerns about the timing. If anyone discovers what we've been planning before everything is in place, no one will discover anything," Camilla interrupted, her voice cold and confident. "I've been planning this for years. Every detail has been carefully considered. The royal family trusts me completely now, and the public has finally accepted me as their queen. They have no idea what's really happening." Charlotte felt a strange chill run down her spine. There was something in Camilla's tone that didn't sound right, something that made her stomach feel twisted and uncomfortable. She had heard adults use that tone before when they were talking about things they didn't want children to know about, things that were supposed to be secret. The man shifted in his chair, and Charlotte could see the side of his face now. His expression looked worried, almost frightened. "But what about the children?" he asked. "They're more observant than you think, especially the little girl. I've heard she has her great-grandmother's intelligence. If she starts asking questions, Charlotte is 9 years old," Camilla said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Children see what adults want them to see. She views me as her kind step-grandmother who brings her sweets and tells her stories. She has no reason to suspect anything different."
Hearing her own name made Charlotte's heart start beating faster. They were talking about her, and something about the way they said it made her feel scared and confused.
She pressed herself even closer to the wall, trying to become invisible while still being able to hear every word. Besides, Camilla continued, walking over to the window and gazing out at the castle grounds. After tomorrow's announcement, it won't matter what anyone thinks or suspects. The transition will be complete, and there will be nothing anyone can do to stop it. And you're certain the documents are convincing? The man asked, opening his briefcase and pulling out what looked like official papers with red seals and ribbons. If these are discovered to be fraudulent, they're perfect, Camilla said firmly. I've had the best people working on them for months. Every signature, every seal, every piece of letterhead is identical to the originals. When the palace officials review them tomorrow, they'll have no choice but to accept what they see. Charlotte didn't understand what they were talking about, but she could tell it was something bad. The way they spoke in whispers, the way they kept looking around nervously, the way Camilla's voice sounded so different from normal. Everything about this conversation felt wrong and dangerous. The man was putting the papers back into his briefcase now, his movements quick and anxious. I still think we should wait longer, he said. The Queen has only been gone for 2 years. People are still grieving, still adjusting to the changes. If we move too quickly, we've waited long enough, Camilla snapped, turning away from the window with an expression that made Charlotte shrink back further into her hiding spot. I didn't spend decades working my way into this family just to wait forever to claim what I deserve. Elizabeth is gone, Charles trusts me completely, and William is too focused on his own family to pay attention to palace politics. This is the perfect time. Charlotte's mind was racing, trying to understand what she was hearing. They were talking about her great-grandmother Queen Elizabeth, and about her grandfather King Charles, and somehow it all connected to something that was happening tomorrow. Something involving fake documents and secrets that no one was supposed to know about. The beauty of it all, Camilla continued, a smile spreading across her face that looked nothing like the warm smiles she gave Charlotte during family dinners, is that no one will ever suspect me. I'm the grieving widow who stepped into an impossible situation and did her best to honor Elizabeth's memory while supporting my husband. I'm the woman who overcame years of public criticism to finally be accepted as queen. Who would ever believe that I could orchestrate something like this? The man stood up from his chair, clutching his briefcase tightly. I hope you're right, he said quietly, because if this goes wrong, it won't just be your reputation at stake. There are other people involved now, people who trusted us to handle this carefully.
Nothing will go wrong, Camilla assured him, walking over to the door where Charlotte was hiding.
For a terrifying moment, Charlotte thought she had been discovered, but Camilla was only checking to make sure the hallway was empty before letting the stranger leave. Charlotte held her breath, pressing herself as flat against the wall as possible. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure everyone in the castle could hear it. She watched as the man hurried past her hiding spot and disappeared down the corridor, his footsteps echoing off the stone walls until they faded completely away. For several minutes, Charlotte stayed frozen in place, afraid to move or breathe too loudly. She could hear Camilla moving around inside the study, the soft sounds of papers being shuffled and drawers being opened and closed. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, she heard the click of high heels on marble as Camilla left the study and walked away in the opposite direction from where Charlotte was hiding. Only when she was absolutely certain she was alone did Charlotte dare to move. Her legs felt shaky as she crept away from the study door, her mind spinning with everything she had heard. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough to know that something terrible was going to happen tomorrow, something that involved her family and fake documents and secrets that could hurt people she loved. As she made her way back through the castle corridors, Charlotte tried to make sense of what she had witnessed. Queen Camilla, who always seemed so kind and caring around the family, had been talking like a completely different person. She had been planning something for years, something that involved deceiving Charlotte's grandfather and the rest of the royal family. And tomorrow, whatever she was planning was going to happen. Charlotte knew she had to tell someone what she had heard, but who would believe her? She was just a 9-year-old girl, and Camilla was the Queen of England. Adults always seemed to think that children didn't understand important things, and Charlotte had learned that sometimes even when children told the truth, adults found ways to explain it away or convince themselves that the children must have misunderstood. But Charlotte also knew that her great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had always taught the family that truth was the most important thing, even when it was difficult or scary to tell. Elizabeth had often said that protecting the people you love sometimes meant being brave enough to speak up, even when it felt impossible. As Charlotte finally found her way back to the familiar corridors near her family's quarters, she made a decision. She would tell her parents, what she had heard, even if they didn't believe her at first. She would find a way to make them understand that something was wrong, that the kind step-grandmother they all trusted was actually planning something that could hurt them all. She just hoped she wasn't too late to stop whatever was going to happen tomorrow. As she walked toward her parents' private sitting room, where she could hear their voices discussing palace business with their advisors, Charlotte felt the weight of a terrible secret pressing down on her small shoulders. She was about to change everything for her family, and she wasn't sure if that change would save them or destroy them, but she knew she had to try. Her great-grandmother would have expected nothing less. Charlotte stood outside her parents' sitting room, her small hand raised to knock on the heavy wooden door, but her courage seemed to have disappeared completely. Through the carved wood, she could hear the familiar voices of her parents mixed with the more formal tones of palace officials. They were discussing schedules and public appearances, the kind of grown-up business that usually made Charlotte's eyes glaze over with boredom. But now, knowing what she knew, even these ordinary conversations seemed different and more important. She had been standing there for almost 10 minutes, trying to find the right words to explain what she had overheard. How could she tell her parents that their trusted stepmother and queen was planning something terrible? How could she make them understand that the woman who had comforted them after great-grandmother Elizabeth's death, who had helped them navigate the difficult transition to a new reign, was actually deceiving them all? The door opened suddenly, startling Charlotte so much that she jumped backward. Sir Marcus Thornberry, one of her grandfather's most trusted advisors, stepped out of the room with a stack of papers under his arm. He was a kind man with gentle eyes and silver hair, who always remembered to ask Charlotte about her riding lessons whenever he visited the family. "Princess Charlotte," he said with surprise, his formal tone softening when he saw her. "What are you doing here, little one? Shouldn't you be having your afternoon lessons?" Before Charlotte could answer, her mother's voice called from inside the room. "Charlotte? Is that you, sweetheart?" "Yes, Mama," Charlotte replied, her voice sounding smaller than she had intended. "May I speak with you and Papa?" "It's very important." Catherine appeared in the doorway, her elegant face showing concern when she saw Charlotte's serious expression. The Duchess of Cambridge had learned to read her daughter's moods expertly over the years, and something about Charlotte's demeanor immediately put her on alert. "Of course, darling. Come in." Catherine stepped aside to let Charlotte enter the room, then closed the door behind them, creating the privacy that Charlotte desperately needed. The sitting room was one of Charlotte's favorite places in their family quarters. The walls were painted a soft blue that reminded her of summer skies, and comfortable furniture was arranged around a fireplace, where a gentle fire crackled even though it wasn't very cold outside. Her father, Prince William, was seated at a small desk near the window, reviewing documents, but he looked up when Charlotte entered and immediately set aside his work. "What's troubling you, Charlotte?" William asked, patting his knee to invite her to come sit with him. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Charlotte walked slowly across the room, her mind still racing with everything she had heard. When she reached her father, she climbed onto his lap but remained stiff and anxious instead of relaxing into his arms the way she usually did. "Papa," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I tell you something very important, something that might sound impossible, will you promise to listen to me, even if it's hard to believe?" Their daughter had always been mature for her age, but this level of seriousness was unusual even for Charlotte. Something had clearly upset her deeply. "Of course we'll listen," Catherine said, moving her chair closer so she could take Charlotte's small hands in hers. "You can tell us anything, sweetheart. We'll always listen to you." But Charlotte took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts into words that would make sense to adults.
"I was exploring the castle today in the parts where we don't usually go."
"I know I shouldn't have, but I was curious about the stories that great-grandmother said every room holds." "Go on," William encouraged gently, though Charlotte could see him tense slightly at the mention of Queen Elizabeth. The family still felt her loss deeply, and anything that reminded them of her wisdom often brought both comfort and sadness. "I heard voices coming from a study, and one of them was Queen Camilla." Charlotte continued, forcing herself to speak more clearly despite her nervousness. "She was talking to a man I didn't recognize, and they were discussing something that's supposed to happen tomorrow." Catherine's grip on Charlotte's hands tightened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of discussion, darling?"
"They talked about fake documents,"
Charlotte said, the words tumbling out faster now that she had started. "The man had papers with red seals and ribbons, and he was worried about whether they would fool people. Camilla told him they were perfect, that she had the best people working on them for months." William's expression grew more serious. "Charlotte, are you absolutely certain about what you heard? Sometimes conversations can sound different when we only catch parts of them." "I heard everything, Papa," Charlotte insisted, her eyes filling with tears of frustration. Camilla said she had been planning something for years, that she didn't spend decades working her way into our family just to wait forever to claim what she deserves. She said no. One would suspect her because everyone trusts her now. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. William and Catherine looked at each other with expressions that Charlotte couldn't quite read, but she could tell they were taking her seriously now. The doubt she had seen in their faces moments earlier was being replaced by something that looked like concern and possibly fear. Did they mention what these documents were for? Catherine asked carefully, her voice steadied but with an underlying tension that Charlotte had never heard before. Charlotte nodded. The man kept asking about timing, saying people were still grieving great-grandmother and adjusting to changes. He wanted to wait longer, but Camilla said she had waited long enough. She said this was the perfect time because grandfather trusts her completely, and you're too focused on our family to pay attention to palace politics. William stood up abruptly, setting Charlotte gently in the chair he had been occupying. He began pacing across the room, his hands clasped behind his back in the way he always did when he was trying to work through a difficult problem. There's more, Charlotte said quietly, watching her father's agitated movements. Camilla said that after tomorrow's announcement, there would be nothing anyone could do to stop the transition. She said it would be complete. Transition to what? Catherine asked, though something in her voice suggested she might already be forming her own theories about what Charlotte had discovered. I don't know, Charlotte admitted. But she talked about it like it was something that would change everything. And when the man worried about people being suspicious, she said no one would ever believe that. The grieving widow who stepped into an impossible situation could orchestrate something like this. William stopped pacing and turned to face his daughter. Charlotte, this is extremely important. I need you to think very carefully. Did you see or hear anything else? Any other details about tomorrow or what kind of announcement they were planning? Charlotte squeezed her eyes shut, trying to remember every word of the conversation. Camilla said that when palace officials review the documents tomorrow, they'll have no choice but to accept what they see. And she mentioned that there are other people involved now, people who trusted them to handle everything carefully. Catherine stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the castle grounds where Charlotte had seen Camilla looking earlier. William, she said softly, we need to contact your father immediately. I know, William replied, his voice grim, but we also need to be extremely careful about how we handle this. If Charlotte is right about what she heard, and if tomorrow really is when something is supposed to happen, we may not have much time. Are you going to tell grandfather? Charlotte asked, relief flooding through her that her parents believed her story. Are you going to stop whatever Camilla is planning? William knelt down beside Charlotte's chair, taking her small face in his large hands. We're going to do everything we can to protect our family and the monarchy, he promised. But Charlotte, what you've told us today is going to change a lot of things. There might be difficult times ahead, and we're going to need you to be very brave. I can be brave, Charlotte said firmly, thinking of her great-grandmother's teachings about courage and truth. Will you be able to stop her? I don't know yet, William answered honestly. But because you had the courage to tell us what you heard, we at least have a chance to try. You may have saved us all, sweetheart. Catherine returned from the window and sat down beside them. Charlotte, we need you to promise us something very important. You cannot tell anyone else about this conversation or about what you overheard today. Not your brothers, not your friends, not anyone. Can you promise us that?
I promise, Charlotte said solemnly. But what if Camilla realizes that someone heard her?
What if she knows it was me? We're not going to let anything happen to you, William assured her. From now on, one of us will always be with you when you're anywhere near Camilla. And we're going to have extra security around our family quarters. Will you arrest her? Charlotte asked, though part of her still couldn't quite believe that this was really happening. Despite everything she had heard, it felt surreal to think that someone she had trusted could be planning something so terrible. We have to be very careful about how we proceed, Catherine explained. Right now, we only have what you overheard, and we don't know exactly what she's planning or how many other people are involved. We need more information before we can take action. William was already moving toward his desk, pulling out his secure phone to make calls that Charlotte knew she wouldn't be allowed to hear. Catherine, I'm going to contact Father and Sir Marcus immediately. We need to convene an emergency meeting of the most trusted palace security advisors. What about tomorrow? Catherine asked. If there's supposed to be some kind of announcement or document review, we'll make sure we're prepared for whatever happens, William said grimly. And we'll make sure Camilla doesn't get the chance to complete whatever she's been planning. Charlotte watched her parents spring into action, making phone calls and sending urgent messages to people she didn't know. The gravity of what she had discovered was finally sinking in, and she realized that her afternoon exploration had uncovered something much bigger and more dangerous than she had initially understood. As evening shadows began to fall across the sitting room, Charlotte found herself wondering what tomorrow would bring. Would they be able to stop Camilla's plan? Would their family be safe? And what would happen to the monarchy if the Queen of England was really involved in some kind of deception that could change everything? She thought about her great-grandmother Elizabeth, who had always taught the family that doing the right thing was more important than doing the easy thing. Charlotte had done the right thing by telling her parents what she had heard, but now all of them would have to be brave enough to face whatever consequences came next. The little princess who had started the day playing hide-and-seek had accidentally uncovered a secret that could shake the very foundations of the British royal family. Tomorrow would reveal whether her courage in speaking up had come in time to save them all. The ancient clock tower of Windsor Castle had just struck midnight, when a secret meeting began in one of the castle's most secure rooms. Prince William sat at the head of a polished mahogany table, his face illuminated by the soft glow of encrypted laptops and secure communication devices. Around him gathered some of the most trusted figures in the royal hierarchy: Sir Marcus Thornbury, the king's principal private secretary; Dame Elizabeth Hartwell, head of royal protection; Commander James Blackwood, chief of palace security; and Catherine, who had insisted on being present despite the late hour. The room itself was a testament to royal secrecy, located 3 floors below the main castle structure, with walls thick enough to block any electronic surveillance. No windows broke the stone walls, and the only entrance was through a series of security doors that required multiple clearances to access. This was where the monarchy's most sensitive crisis management had taken place for generations. "Before we begin," William said, his voice carrying the weight of his position despite his exhaustion, "I want to emphasize that nothing discussed in this room can leave these walls until we have a complete understanding of what we're facing." Sir Marcus adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened a leather folder filled with notes he had been compiling since William's urgent phone call hours earlier.
Your Royal Highness, I've spent the evening conducting preliminary inquiries based on Princess Charlotte's information.
What we've discovered is deeply troubling. Dame Elizabeth leaned forward, her silver hair pulled back severely and her expression grim. Security has been reviewing surveillance footage from the castle corridors for the past 6 months. We've identified at least 12 instances of Queen Camilla meeting with individuals who are not part of the regular palace staff or approved visitor lists. Do we know who these people are? Catherine asked, taking notes on a secure tablet that would automatically encrypt and store anything she recorded. Commander Blackwood consulted his own tablet before responding. We've managed to identify 3 of them so far. One is a document specialist who has previously worked for certain organizations that specialize in creating high-quality forgeries for intelligence agencies. Another is a financial advisor who has connections to several offshore banking institutions. The third appears to be a legal expert in constitutional law, specifically regarding succession and inheritance within monarchies. William felt his stomach clench as the implications became clear. This suggests something far more comprehensive than we initially feared. There's more, Sir Marcus continued, his voice growing even more serious. I've been discreetly reviewing the Queen's recent activities and communications. Over the past 3 months, she has requested access to several historical documents from the royal archives, including original succession documents dating back to King George V, legal precedents regarding regency powers, and detailed financial records of the Crown estate. What possible legitimate reason could she have for accessing those materials? Catherine asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer wouldn't be innocent. Dame Elizabeth pulled out a series of photographs that made everyone at the table lean forward with concern. These are surveillance images from yesterday's meeting that Princess Charlotte witnessed. We've enhanced them to show the documents that were being discussed. The photographs were grainy but clear enough to see the red seals and ribbons that Charlotte had described. More importantly, they showed the distinctive format and layout of official royal documents, complete with what appeared to be authentic letterheads and signatures. Our document analysis experts have examined these images, Commander Blackwood explained. While we can't determine definitively without seeing the actual papers, the format suggests these are designed to mimic succession documents, or possibly regency appointments. William stood up and began pacing, just as he had done earlier when Charlotte first told them what she had overheard. If Camilla is creating forged documents related to succession, what could she possibly hope to achieve? The line of succession is clearly established by law and tradition. That's where it gets complicated, Sir Marcus said, pulling out another set of documents from his folder. There are certain historical precedents and constitutional provisions that could theoretically be exploited if someone had the right documentation and the right timing. He spread the papers across the table, pointing to specific passages highlighted in yellow. For instance, if there were evidence of mental incapacity or abdication papers that had been kept secret, or if there were documentation of a previously unknown marriage that could affect legitimacy, these could potentially be used to alter the succession. Catherine looked up from her note-taking with alarm. Are you suggesting she might be planning to forge documents that would somehow remove Charles from the throne? Or alternatively, Dame Elizabeth added quietly, documents that would establish a regency with herself as regent, giving her the full powers of monarchy while technically keeping King Charles on the throne. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what they were discussing. The idea that someone could attempt to manipulate the British succession through forged documents seemed almost impossible to believe, yet the evidence was mounting that exactly such a plan might be in motion. What about tomorrow's announcement? William asked. Charlotte said they were planning something specific for tomorrow. Commander Blackwood consulted his scheduling tablet. Tomorrow morning there's a routine meeting of the Privy Council scheduled to review and approve several ceremonial matters. It's the kind of meeting where documents are often presented for official recognition and formal recording. If fake succession documents were presented to the Privy Council during what appeared to be a routine session, Sir Marcus explained, and if those documents appeared authentic enough to fool even experienced officials, they could potentially be approved and entered into the official record before anyone realized what had happened. Once something is officially recorded by the Privy Council, Dame Elizabeth continued, reversing it becomes extremely complicated, even if fraud is later discovered. The legal challenges alone could take months or years to resolve, during which time the monarchy would be in constitutional crisis. William stopped pacing and turned to face the group. So we're looking at a potential coup attempt disguised as routine paperwork. It's brilliant in its audacity, Sir Marcus admitted reluctantly. Camilla has spent years building trust and establishing herself as a legitimate queen. She has access to the right people, the right documents, and the right opportunities. Most importantly, she has the trust of the king and the respect of palace officials who would never suspect her of such deception. Catherine set down her tablet and looked around the table at each person present. What are our options? How do we stop this without creating the very constitutional crisis we're trying to prevent? We have several challenges, Commander Blackwood explained. First, we need concrete evidence of the forgeries, which means we need to get our hands on the actual documents. Second, we need to identify all the people involved in this conspiracy. Third, we need to stop tomorrow's presentation without alerting Camilla that we know about her plans. Can't we simply cancel tomorrow's Privy Council meeting? Catherine suggested. That would raise immediate suspicions, Sir Marcus replied. These meetings are scheduled months in advance, and canceling one at the last minute would require explanations that we're not prepared to give. Moreover, if Camilla realizes we're onto her, she might accelerate her timeline or activate backup plans we don't know about. Dame Elizabeth opened another folder and spread out what appeared to be floor plans of the castle. Our best option might be to allow the meeting to proceed while taking steps to ensure we can intercept and examine any documents before they're formally presented. How would that work? William asked, studying the diagrams. Security personnel could be positioned at strategic points, Commander Blackwood explained, pointing to locations on the floor plans. We could arrange for the documents to be accidentally delayed or misdirected before they reach the Privy Council chambers. Our experts would have time to examine them and document the forgeries before returning them to the normal process. And if they are genuine? Catherine asked. What if we're wrong about all of this? The question hung heavy in the air. Everyone in the room understood the implications of accusing the Queen of England of treason based on the overheard conversation of a 9-year-old child, even one as observant and intelligent as Princess Charlotte. That's a risk we have to take, William said finally. The alternative is to allow what could be a successful coup to proceed unchallenged. If we're wrong, we'll face consequences for our suspicions. If we're right and do nothing, we could lose the monarchy entirely. Sir Marcus closed his folder and looked directly at William. There's another consideration. Your Royal Highness, if these allegations prove true, the scandal will be enormous. The public revelation that the Queen attempted to manipulate the succession through forged documents would shake public confidence in the monarchy more severely than almost anything in our history. Which is exactly why we need to handle this with absolute discretion until we have irrefutable proof, William replied. The British people deserve to know the truth, but they also deserve to have that truth presented in a way that preserves their faith in the institution itself. Dame Elizabeth gathered up the surveillance photographs and floor plans. We have approximately 7 hours before the Privy Council meeting begins. I suggest we finalize our intervention plan and position our people tonight. What about King Charles? Catherine asked. When do we inform him of what we suspect? William considered the question carefully. Not until we have proof. If we're wrong, It would be devastating for him to learn that he had suspected his wife of treason based on incomplete information. If we're right, he'll need to be told in a way that gives him time to process the betrayal before any public action is required. As the meeting concluded, and the participants began preparing for what could be one of the most significant days in recent royal history, each person carried the weight of their responsibility. They were not just protecting a family or even a monarchy, but the very foundations of British constitutional government. In a few hours they would discover whether Princess Charlotte's courage in speaking up had come in time to prevent a crisis that could have changed the course of history. The little girl who had stumbled upon a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear had set in motion events that would either save the royal family or expose them to their greatest challenge in generations. The investigation was complete. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation. The Privy Council chamber at Windsor Castle had witnessed centuries of momentous decisions that shaped the British Empire and beyond. This morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the tall Gothic windows, the ancient room was about to become the stage for one of the most dramatic confrontations in royal history. The chamber's oak-paneled walls, adorned with portraits of monarchs dating back to Henry VIII, seemed to watch silently as the day's participants took their positions for what none of them yet realized would be a battle for the soul of the monarchy. Queen Camilla entered the chamber precisely at 9 o'clock, her appearance immaculate as always. She wore a deep navy suit with a subtle diamond brooch that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her expression carrying the serene confidence of someone who believed victory was within reach. In her hands, she carried an elegant leather portfolio that Commander Blackwood's hidden cameras immediately focused on with high-definition precision. Behind her walked the mysterious man Charlotte had seen the previous day, now identified as Dr. Marcus Whitfield, a constitutional lawyer whose expertise in succession law had made him invaluable to Camilla's plans. He carried a matching briefcase, and his nervous energy was barely concealed beneath his professional demeanor. His eyes darted around the chamber, as if he were memorizing every detail, or perhaps looking for signs that their plot had been discovered. The other members of the Privy Council were already seated around the massive oval table that dominated the center of the room. These were distinguished gentlemen and ladies who had served the crown for decades, their combined experience representing hundreds of years of loyal service to the monarchy. None of them had any idea that they were about to become unwitting participants in an attempted constitutional coup. Lord Chancellor Pembroke, a dignified man in his 70s, whose family had served the royal house for 3 generations, called the meeting to order with the traditional formalities that had been observed for centuries. The chamber fell silent, except for the scratching of pens on paper as the official secretary prepared to record every word spoken during the proceedings. "Your Majesty," Lord Pembroke said, addressing Camilla with the respect due to her position, "I understand you have some documents requiring official review and certification today." "Indeed," Camilla replied, her voice carrying exactly the right tone of routine formality mixed with underlying importance. "These are some recently discovered historical documents that require proper authentication and official recording. They relate to certain constitutional provisions that have bearing on current royal arrangements." 3 floors below, in the secure command center that had been hastily established during the night, Prince William watched the proceedings through multiple hidden camera feeds, while a team of experts monitored every sound and movement in the chamber above. Dame Elizabeth stood beside him, her finger hovering over a communication device that would signal security personnel positioned throughout the castle. "She's presenting herself perfectly," Catherine observed, watching Camilla's performance on the main screen. If we didn't know what we know, this would appear completely legitimate. Sir Marcus was coordinating with document experts who were standing by to examine whatever papers Camilla was about to present. "Remember," he said into his headset, "we need clear evidence of forgery before we can intervene. Suspicion alone isn't enough to stop a sitting queen." In the Privy Council chamber, Camilla was opening her portfolio with deliberate ceremony. "These documents were recently discovered in the private papers of the late Queen Elizabeth," she explained, her voice carrying just the right note of reverence for her predecessor. "They appear to contain provisions that were never formally recorded or implemented, possibly due to the timing of Her Majesty's passing." Dr. Whitfield stepped forward and placed his briefcase on the table. "With Your Majesty's permission, I would like to present the legal analysis that accompanies these historical findings." Lord Pembroke nodded respectfully.
Of course.
"Please proceed." What happened next unfolded with the precision of a carefully orchestrated performance. Camilla removed a series of documents from her portfolio, each one bearing official seals, ribbons, and signatures that appeared authentic even under the scrutiny of experienced eyes. The papers were aged to perfection, with exactly the right amount of yellowing and the subtle wear patterns that would be expected from documents that had been stored in royal archives for years. The first document, Camilla explained, holding up a paper that bore the unmistakable formatting of official royal correspondence, appears to be a provision written by Queen Elizabeth regarding the expansion of regency powers during times of constitutional transition or uncertainty. In the command center below, the document experts were analyzing high-definition images of the papers in real time. The formatting looks correct, one specialist reported through his headset, but there's something unusual about the paper composition. These inks weren't used in official documents during the time period these are supposed to represent. The second document, Dr. Whitfield continued, removing another paper from his briefcase, contains what appears to be a previously unknown codicil to certain succession provisions, establishing expanded authority for the surviving spouse of a reigning monarch. William felt his hands clench into fists as he watched the presentation unfold. The audacity of what Camilla was attempting was breathtaking, but so was the sophistication of her deception. If they hadn't been warned by Charlotte's discovery, these documents might very well have been accepted and recorded as legitimate. "Sir," one of the document analysts reported urgently, "we've found definitive proof of forgery. The watermarks in the paper are from a manufacturer that didn't begin producing this specific type until 2018, but these documents are supposedly from 22 and earlier. Additionally, the ink composition includes synthetic compounds that weren't available during Queen Elizabeth's lifetime." Dame Elizabeth immediately activated her communication device. "All units, this is confirmation. Proceed with intervention protocol." In the Privy Council chamber, Lord Pembroke was examining the documents with growing interest. "These are quite remarkable findings, Your Majesty. If authentic, they would indeed have significant implications for current constitutional arrangements. The authentication process has been thorough," Camilla assured him, her confidence never wavering. "I've had the kingdom's finest experts verify every aspect of these documents." It was at that moment that the chamber doors opened, with a quiet authority that immediately commanded attention. Prince William entered, followed by Catherine, Sir Marcus, and Dame Elizabeth. The change in atmosphere was immediate and electric. Camilla's composed expression flickered for just an instant before she regained control, but that moment of uncertainty was captured by every camera in the room. "Father," William said, addressing Lord Pembroke with respectful formality, "I apologize for the interruption, but urgent matters have come to light that require immediate attention before these proceedings continue." Lord Pembroke looked confused but maintained his dignity. "Your Royal Highness, this is highly irregular." "The Privy Council is in formal session." "I understand the irregularity," William replied, walking deliberately toward the table where Camilla's documents lay spread out. "However, we have reason to believe that the documents currently under review may not be authentic." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the chamber seemed to hold their breath as the implications of William's statement sank in. Camilla's face went pale, but she maintained her regal composure with remarkable skill. "That's a very serious accusation," she said, her voice steady but with an underlying edge of steel. "These documents have been thoroughly authenticated by qualified experts." Dame Elizabeth stepped forward, carrying a folder filled with the analysis that had been conducted during the night. "Your Majesty, we have evidence that suggests these documents contain materials and manufacturing techniques that were not available during the time periods they supposedly represent." Dr. Whitfield started to rise from his chair, but Commander Blackwood appeared seemingly from nowhere to place a firm but respectful hand on his shoulder. "Whitfield, I think it would be best if you remained seated while we sort this matter out." The constitutional lawyer's nervous energy had transformed into something approaching panic. His careful composure cracked completely as he realized their plan was falling apart. "This is outrageous," he protested. "We have done nothing wrong. These are legitimate historical discoveries." William moved closer to the table, his eyes never leaving Camilla's face. "Stepmother," he said quietly, using the family term that highlighted the personal betrayal underlying the political crisis. "We know about the meetings, the specialists you consulted, and the plans you've been developing for months. We know about yesterday's conversation and tomorrow's intended outcome." For the first time since entering the chamber, Camilla's mask slipped completely. The serene confidence was replaced by something colder and more calculating. "You know nothing," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout could have. "And you can prove nothing." "Actually," Catherine said, stepping forward with a tablet containing the surveillance footage and audio recordings that had been collected, "we can prove quite a lot." As the evidence was presented to the stunned members of the Privy Council, the full scope of Camilla's deception began to emerge. The forged documents, the carefully recruited experts, the exploitation of constitutional loopholes, the manipulation of trust and timing. Every element of the conspiracy was laid out with methodical precision. The plan was elegant, Sir Marcus explained to the assembled group, his voice heavy with disappointment. By presenting these forged documents during a routine Privy Council meeting, they would have been officially recorded before anyone had time to properly examine them. Once entered into the official record, challenging their authenticity would have created exactly the kind of constitutional crisis that could destabilize the monarchy. Lord Pembroke, his face grave with the weight of what he was hearing, turned to address Camilla directly.
Your Majesty, these are charges of the utmost seriousness.
How do you respond to these allegations? Camilla stood slowly, her royal bearing intact despite the collapse of her plans. I respond, she said with icy dignity, that you are all making a terrible mistake. But I also realize that the damage to my reputation and to the monarchy has already been done, regardless of the truth. The truth, William said firmly, is that my 9-year-old daughter overheard your conversation yesterday and had the courage to tell us what she witnessed. The truth is that we spent the night investigating your activities and found evidence of a conspiracy that could have destroyed everything our family has worked to protect. The mention of Charlotte brought a flash of something that might have been regret across Camilla's face. The child, she said softly. I underestimated her intelligence and her loyalty to her family. Yes, Catherine said, her voice carrying both pride and sadness. You did. As security personnel moved to secure the forged documents and escort Dr. Whitfield from the chamber, Camilla maintained her dignity even in defeat. She had gambled everything on a plan that could have made her the most powerful woman in Britain, and she had lost because she failed to account for the observant eyes and brave heart of a little girl who loved her family more than she feared the consequences of telling difficult truths. The confrontation was over, but the crisis was just beginning. The revelation that the Queen of England had attempted to manipulate the succession through forged documents would send shockwaves through the government, the media, and the British people. The monarchy would survive, but it would be forever changed by the events of this morning. In saving her family from Camilla's deception, Princess Charlotte had unknowingly triggered a scandal that would reshape the royal house for generations to come. 6 months after the dramatic confrontation in the Privy Council chamber, Windsor Castle had settled into a new rhythm that reflected both healing and permanent change. The ancient walls that had witnessed centuries of royal drama now held different secrets, different conversations, and most importantly, different levels of trust than had existed before Princess Charlotte's discovery changed everything. In the private family quarters that had become a sanctuary during the most difficult weeks of the crisis, Charlotte sat in her favorite reading chair by the window, a thick book about British history open on her lap. But instead of reading, she was watching her parents and grandfather King Charles as they discussed the final details of what the media had carefully termed the constitutional clarification process. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the magnitude of what had taken place, but it helped the monarchy navigate the crisis with dignity and tact. King Charles looked older than he had 6 months earlier, the strain of discovering his wife's betrayal having added new lines to his face and a certain heaviness to his movements. But there was also something lighter about him now, as if the removal of deception from his life had allowed him to breathe more freely. He had handled the revelation and its aftermath with the steady grace that the British people expected from their monarch, even as his personal world crumbled around him. The final legal proceedings concluded yesterday, he was telling William and Catherine, his voice carrying both relief and residual sadness. Dr. Whitfield has been sentenced to 7 years in prison for conspiracy and document fraud. The other conspirators received sentences ranging from 3 to 5 years. And Camilla? Catherine asked gently, though everyone in the room knew the answer. The decision was made to handle her case privately, Charles replied, his voice carefully neutral. Prosecution would have meant a public trial that could have damaged the monarchy beyond repair. Instead, she has agreed to permanent exile and the complete renunciation of all royal titles and privileges. Charlotte looked up from her book, her young face serious with understanding that seemed far beyond her 9 years. Where will she go, grandfather? She has family in Australia, Charles answered, his tone softening when he spoke to his granddaughter. She will live quietly there, away from public attention. It's the best solution for everyone involved. The past 6 months had been a careful balancing act between justice and discretion. The palace had worked with government officials to ensure that the conspiracy was thoroughly investigated and punished while minimizing the public scandal that could have shaken confidence in the entire constitutional system. The official story spoke of irregularities discovered in document authentication procedures and the preventive measures taken to ensure governmental integrity. Only a small circle of trusted individuals knew the complete truth about how close the monarchy had come to constitutional crisis. Sir Marcus entered the sitting room carrying a leather portfolio that had become familiar over the months of legal proceedings and official investigations. His role had evolved from royal advisor to crisis manager to the architect of the monarchy's recovery strategy. "Your Majesty," he said, addressing King Charles with the respectful formality that remained unchanged despite the personal nature of recent events. "I have the final documentation regarding the Constitutional Review Commission's recommendations." The commission had been established quietly in the weeks following Camilla's exposure, tasked with examining existing procedures for document authentication and succession protocols. Their recommendations would strengthen the systems that had been exploited, ensuring that such a conspiracy could never again come so close to success. The primary changes involve enhanced security protocols for document handling, expanded background checks for constitutional advisors, and new oversight procedures for Privy Council proceedings, Sir Marcus explained, spreading the documents across the coffee table where everyone could review them. More importantly, he continued, the Commission has recommended the establishment of a new position within the royal household, a constitutional security advisor whose sole responsibility will be monitoring and preventing threats to succession integrity. William leaned forward to examine the proposals more closely. These seem comprehensive. How quickly can they be implemented? Most of the procedural changes can be in place within 60 days, Sir Marcus replied. The personnel changes will take longer, as we need to identify and vet candidates who have both the expertise and the absolute trustworthiness required for such positions. Charlotte set aside her book and moved closer to where the adults were working. Over the past months, her parents had made a conscious decision to include her in age-appropriate discussions about the events she had helped uncover. They felt she had earned the right to understand the consequences of her courage, and her insights had proven valuable in ways that surprised everyone. "Charlotte," her grandfather said, noticing her interest in the documents, "would you like to see what changes are being made because you were brave enough to tell us what you heard?" Charlotte nodded eagerly and climbed onto the sofa beside King Charles, who carefully showed her the simplified summaries that had been prepared specifically for family review. "These new rules will make it much harder for anyone to trick the palace with fake documents," he explained, pointing to sections that outlined enhanced authentication procedures. "And these rules will make sure that more people are watching to protect the crown and the country. Will it keep everyone safe?" Charlotte asked the question carrying both innocent curiosity and the weight of someone who had personally witnessed how dangerous deception could be.
Much safer, Charles assured her, wrapping his arm around her small shoulders.
"And if something like this ever happens again, we now know how important it is to listen when brave young people tell us they've heard something wrong." Dame Elizabeth arrived with the afternoon security briefing, another new routine that had been established in the aftermath of the crisis. The expansion of security protocols had been one of the most immediate changes, reflecting the reality that threats to the monarchy could come from within as well as from external sources. "The enhanced background screening of all palace personnel has been completed," she reported. Additionally, the new communication monitoring systems are now operational, providing early warning capabilities for any future conspiracies or threats.
Catherine looked up from the constitutional documents she had been reviewing.
"What about public reaction to these changes? How much do people understand about what happened?" "The public has been remarkably understanding," Dame Elizabeth replied. "The official explanation of strengthening constitutional safeguards has been accepted without significant skepticism. There's been some media speculation, but nothing that approaches the truth of what was actually prevented." Sir Marcus gathered up the documents as the briefing concluded. "The most important outcome may be the demonstration that our constitutional system is resilient and self-correcting. When threatened, the monarchy responded quickly and effectively to protect both the institution and the people it serves." As evening approached and the various advisors departed, the family was left alone for the first time that day. These moments had become precious during the months of crisis management, providing opportunities for healing and rebuilding trust that had been strained by events none of them could have imagined. "Charlotte," William said, settling into the chair beside his daughter, "do you understand how important what you did was for our family and our country?" Charlotte considered the question seriously before answering. "I think I stopped something very bad from happening, but I also think I helped grandfather learn that someone he trusted was lying to him." The simple clarity of her assessment made all the adults smile, despite the serious nature of the topic. Charles reached over to take his granddaughter's hand. "You did exactly what your great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, would have wanted you to do," he told her. "You chose truth over comfort, courage over silence, and family over fear. Those are the values that make the monarchy worthy of the people's trust." As night fell over Windsor Castle, Princess Charlotte fell asleep in her favorite chair, surrounded by the family she had protected through her bravery. The events of the past months had tested everyone's strength and faith, but they had also revealed the fundamental resilience of an institution that could adapt and survive even the most profound betrayals. The constitutional reforms that would be implemented in the coming months would make the monarchy stronger and more secure. The enhanced security protocols would prevent future conspiracies. The expanded oversight procedures would ensure accountability and transparency. But perhaps most importantly, the crisis had demonstrated that sometimes the most essential protections come not from elaborate systems or complex procedures, but from the simple courage of someone who refuses to stay silent when they witness something wrong. Princess Charlotte had saved the British monarchy not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but by doing what her great-grandmother had taught all the royal children to do: tell the truth, protect the people you love, and never underestimate the power of doing what is right even when it seems impossible. The little girl who had started her adventure by exploring forbidden corridors had ended it by helping her family navigate their way back to the principles that made them worthy of the crown they wore. In protecting her grandfather from deception, she had also protected a nation from constitutional crisis and preserved an institution that had served the British people for over 1,000 years. The royal secret that changed everything had been exposed not by investigators or security experts, but by a 9-year-old princess who understood that some truths are too important to keep hidden, no matter how frightening they might be to reveal.
As Charlotte slept peacefully in her chair, surrounded by the family she had saved, the ancient castle settled into the quiet rhythms of night, its walls now protecting secrets of courage and love rather than conspiracy and betrayal.
The monarchy would continue, stronger and wiser than before, because a brave young princess had refused to let fear silence her voice when it mattered most.